The collapse of the Roman Empire represents one of the most significant economic implosions in recorded history, characterized by the total evaporation of a 500-year-old civilization within a single generation. While traditional historical narratives emphasize barbarian invasions, the fundamental cause of Rome's demise was the systematic destruction of its monetary system. Fortunes built over centuries vanished as the denarius, the silver coin that served as the economic heartbeat of an empire stretching from Scotland to Syria, lost its intrinsic value. Under Emperor Augustus, the denarius maintained a purity of approximately 95% silver, functioning as a tangible representation of imperial stability and commercial confidence. This currency facilitated the pay of legionnaires, the profit margins of merchants, and the life savings of farmers across a sophisticated trade network of 70 million people. However, the escalating costs of maintaining a frontier empire against Germanic tribes in the north and the Sassanid Persians in the east eventually exceeded the capacity of any existing tax system. In response to these mounting financial obligations, the Roman state resorted to a practice common throughout history, the systematic debasement of its currency. By the reign of Caracalla in the early 3rd century, the silver content of the denarius had been reduced to roughly 50%, with the remaining half quietly replaced by bronze. This process of decay accelerated during the mid-3rd century under Emperor Gallienus, who faced 23 rival claimants to his throne in just 15 years. During this intense political instability, the silver content of the denarius plummeted to less than 5%, leaving a currency that was merely cheap metal covered in a thin silver wash. This monetary fraud did not go unnoticed by the Roman population, leading to a catastrophic loss of confidence in the imperial medium of exchange. Prices escalated rapidly as merchants refused to accept debased coins for imported goods, and soldiers demanded constant pay increases to compensate for the currency's diminishing purchasing power. The fracturing of the trade network between 235 and 284 AD, known as the Crisis of the 3rd century, saw the simultaneous occurrence of military collapse, plague, civil war, and economic ruin. Despite this widespread devastation, specific classes of assets allowed select families not only to preserve their wealth, but to emerge from the collapse in a stronger economic position. The first asset category that successfully navigated the crisis was gold, specifically gold of verified and consistent purity. In 312 AD, Constantine the Great introduced the solidus, a 24-karat gold coin weighing 4.5 grams, struck with precise standards across every imperial mint. The introduction of the solidus was a decisive move against the monetary manipulation that had eroded the empire's foundations for a century. The market immediately recognized the solidus as a reliable medium of exchange, and it quickly became the preferred currency for the wealthy and those engaged in significant international commerce. Even after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire into various Germanic kingdoms, the solidus remained the backbone of Mediterranean trade for 7 centuries. The success of this asset highlights a critical distinction. The value resided not in the political decree of the coin, but in the metal content itself. Those who held their wealth in debased silver coins were financially ruined, while those who converted their positions into pure gold by weight maintained their economic standing. Historical evidence suggests that the wealthy classes increasingly demanded payment in pure gold by weight, treating the coin merely as a political instrument subject to dilution. This historical lesson underscores the principle that what cannot be diluted or debased remains a permanent store of value during times of monetary stress. A second, highly counterintuitive asset during the Roman collapse was debt, which functioned as a significant mechanism for wealth transfer during periods of hyperinflation. When a Roman landowner took out a loan of 100,000 denarii in 200 AD, that sum represented a genuine fortune capable of acquiring a productive agricultural estate. By 280 AD, the same nominal sum of 100,000 denarii could only purchase a few sacks of grain due to the 90% collapse in the currency's silver content. Because the debt obligations remained denominated in nominal denarii, borrowers were able to repay their loans in money that had become functionally worthless. This process systematically transferred wealth from creditors, who received back debased bronze coins, to debtors, who retained ownership of real productive assets. The senatorial class in the late 3rd century utilized this dynamic by leveraging land holdings with debt that was eventually inflated away. Analysis of the Roman aristocracy shows that great landed families maintained extraordinary economic power even after the formal dissolution of the Western Empire. These families negotiated from positions of strength with new political leaders because their debtors' advantage had secured real assets unencumbered by original financial obligations. The material evidence of the post-Roman world confirms that while the general standard of living collapsed, the great villa estates continued to operate and produce. This phenomenon demonstrates that in a failing system, inflation acts as a wealth transfer mechanism away from holders of paper claims towards holders of real assets funded by devalued currency. The third asset that ensured survival was the self-sufficient estate, which operated as a closed-loop economy independent of collapsing trade networks. At its peak, the Roman economy was a deeply interconnected system relying on Spanish oil, Egyptian grain, and Syrian dyes. When the complexity of this supply chain fractured, landowners who depended on export markets and imported tools found their property's economic function destroyed. In contrast, the self-sufficient villa of the late imperial period produced its own grain, vegetables, meat, timber, wool, and leather. These estates maintained internal infrastructure, including smiths, carpenters, physicians, and industrial workshops, making them resilient to the contraction of the broader imperial economy. The strategic decision to increase self-sufficiency was a direct hedge against the growing liability of systemic complexity. Beyond economic survival, these estates became centers of local political authority as the formal state apparatus withdrew from public life. When tax collectors, legions, and safe roads vanished, the large villa owner filled the vacuum by providing physical security and stable employment. The social structures that crystallized around these self-sufficient estates eventually served as the template for medieval feudalism. This transition illustrates that an asset that endures a collapse often becomes the structural foundation for the subsequent political and social order. The fourth category of surviving value was the irreplaceable skill, representing human capabilities that maintain exchange value regardless of institutional failure. Economic collapse serves as a ruthless sorting mechanism that renders institutional credentials and titles worthless once the validating framework disappears. Only two types of human capability consistently retain value when currencies fail and supply chains dissolve. The first type includes skills that address immediate and unavoidable human needs, such as the abilities of physicians, blacksmiths, millers, and carpenters.
A physician capable of treating infection without imported medicines, or a blacksmith who can forge tools from scrap metal, possesses a value that cannot be inflated away. These individuals could secure food and resources because their output was essential to daily survival, independent of the emperor on a coin or the value of a specific currency. The second type includes skills that enable commerce across fragmented political boundaries, specifically the role of the merchant who maintains trusted relationships in multiple jurisdictions. As Rome disintegrated, trade did not vanish, but instead became fragmented among competing Germanic kingdoms and shifting borders. Merchants who could operate across these boundaries and speak multiple languages remained vital to the functioning of local economies.
Conversely, professionals whose value was purely institutional, such as lawyers, imperial administrators, and military logistics officers, faced significant fragility. Their economic identity was tied to a system that eventually became bankrupt or ceased to function entirely. The craftsmen and physicians who survived the fall were the ones who carried the practical technical knowledge of Roman civilization into the succeeding centuries. Systems theory suggests that complex societies maintain specialists whose functions depend entirely on the maintenance of that complexity. When the complexity fails, these specialists become redundant, while those with skills that function at lower levels of complexity remain indispensable. The enduring legacy of the Roman collapse provides a clear map of what constitutes a durable asset in times of systemic failure. Gold survived as a store of value, but only when it was held in a form that could be independently verified without institutional intermediaries. Debt in a collapsing currency functioned as a hidden bridge to the ownership of real, unencumbered property. Self-sufficient land endured by severing its dependence on the external networks that were most vulnerable to disruption. Finally, portable knowledge and practical skills provided a form of capital that no political decree could confiscate or make obsolete. The Roman experience teaches that what survives a collapse is not what a system values during periods of prosperity, but what is impossible to fake, dilute, or make redundant. The belief that a state can resolve a fiscal crisis by manipulating its currency is a recurring historical fallacy with predictable consequences. Complexity, while a mark of advancement, also introduces significant vulnerabilities that accelerate the process of unraveling once a system begins to fail. Modern financial systems, characterized by higher complexity and a total decoupling from tangible value, share the same structural risks as the Roman trade network. The transition from stability to collapse often happens slowly at first, followed by a rapid and total disintegration of established norms. Understanding these four assets, gold, strategic debt, self-sufficiency, and essential skills, reveals the permanent mechanics of economic survival throughout history.